Lieutenant Sarah Chen adjusted her uniform one final time before stepping out of her rental car at Fort Henderson. The morning sun cast long shadows across the military base as she walked toward the administration building. Her polished boots clicked against the concrete walkway, and her posture remained perfectly straight, despite the exhaustion from her overnight flight from Washington, D.C. At 28 years old, Sarah had already made a name for herself in military intelligence. Her small frame and youthful appearance often worked to her advantage in the field, but she knew it sometimes caused problems in formal military settings. Today was different, though. Today, she was here on official business that would change everything. The base bustled with morning activity. Soldiers jogged in formation, their cadences echoing across the grounds. Vehicles moved in organized patterns, and the American flag snapped proudly in the desert wind. Sarah had been to many military installations, but Fort Henderson held special significance. This was where her career had truly begun 5 years ago as a fresh second lieutenant. Inside the administration building, the air conditioning provided welcome relief from the Arizona heat. Sarah approached the reception desk where a young corporal sat typing on his computer. His name tag read Martinez, and he looked up with a polite but distracted expression. "Good morning, ma'am. How can I help you?" Sarah placed her identification on the counter. "Lieutenant Chen, reporting for the morning briefing with Colonel Williams." Corporal Martinez glanced at her ID, then back at her face. His expression shifted slightly, and Sarah recognized the look. It was the same expression she had seen countless times throughout her career, surprise mixed with barely concealed doubt. Here was this small Asian woman claiming to be a military officer, and in his mind, she simply did not fit the expected image. "Lieutenant Chen," he repeated slowly, as if testing the words. "Are you sure you have the right building? The civilian contractor briefings are in Building C." Sarah's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, but her voice remained steady and professional. "I'm a commissioned officer in the United States Army, Corporal. My meeting is with Colonel Williams regarding intelligence matters." The young soldier's face reddened. "Yes, ma'am. Sorry, ma'am. Let me call up to his office." As Martinez made the call, Sarah surveyed the lobby. Military protocols and chain-of-command charts decorated the walls. Photos of distinguished officers from the base's history hung in neat rows. She noticed that most of the faces were male, though recent additions showed more diversity. Change was happening, but slowly. "Ma'am, Colonel Williams will see you now. 3rd floor, room 312. Sarah nodded her thanks and headed for the elevator. As she waited, she reflected on the complexity of her current mission. She was not just here for a routine briefing. The Pentagon had sent her to investigate serious concerns about security breaches at Fort Henderson. Someone had been selling classified information, and the trail led back to this base. The elevator doors opened on the 3rd floor, revealing a long corridor lined with office doors. Sarah found room 312 and knocked firmly. "Enter!" The voice that called out was deep and commanding. Sarah opened the door and stepped inside to find herself face-to-face with Colonel Robert Williams. He was exactly what central casting would order for a military officer, tall, broad-shouldered, with silver hair and a mustache. His uniform was immaculate, his bearing imposing. Behind him, the wall displayed an impressive collection of commendations and photographs from various deployments. Colonel Williams looked up from his desk with the same expression Sarah had grown accustomed to seeing. His eyes swept over her small frame, taking in her lieutenant's bars with obvious skepticism. A slight smirk played at the corners of his mouth. "Well, well," he said, leaning back in his chair. "They're sending children to do intelligence work now?" Sarah remained at attention. "Colonel Williams, I'm Lieutenant Chen from the Pentagon. I believe you received notification of my visit?" The colonel's smirk widened into a condescending smile. "Oh, I received notification, all right. Though I have to admit I was expecting someone a bit more substantial. Are you sure you wouldn't be more comfortable in the administrative pool? We have openings in data entry. The comment hung in the air like a challenge. Sarah had dealt with this attitude before, but it never stopped stinging. She had worked twice as hard as her male counterparts to earn respect, only to face the same prejudices again and again. What Colonel Williams did not know was that his comments were not just insulting, they were dangerous to his career. Sir, with respect, I'm here on official Pentagon business. The nature of my assignment is classified, and I need to brief you on the security concerns that have brought me here. Colonel Williams laughed, a harsh barking sound that filled the office. Security concerns? Sweetheart, I've been running this base for 3 years without a single major incident. What could possibly concern the Pentagon enough to send a little girl to check up on me? Sarah's hands clenched into fists at her sides, but her voice remained steady. Colonel, there have been multiple breaches of classified information originating from this base. The Pentagon has reason to believe someone with high-level access has been selling secrets to foreign agents. The colonel's laughter stopped abruptly. His face hardened as he leaned forward. That's a serious accusation. Lieutenant, I hope you have proof to back up such claims. I have evidence, sir, but first, I need to establish the full scope of security protocols currently in place at Fort Henderson. Colonel Williams stood up slowly, his full height towering over Sarah's petite frame. He walked around his desk and positioned himself uncomfortably close to her. It was a classic intimidation tactic, using his size and position to make her feel small and powerless. Listen here, little girl, he said, his voice dropping to a threatening whisper. I don't know what game you think you're playing, but this is my base. I've been in the Army longer than you've been alive. I've served in 3 combat zones and earned every decoration on that wall through blood, sweat, and sacrifice. I don't appreciate some desk jockey from Washington coming here to question my competence. Sarah did not step back, though every instinct told her to retreat from his aggressive posture. Instead, she looked up at him with calm, steady eyes. Colonel Williams, I understand your frustration, but I'm not here to question your competence. I'm here because the Pentagon has identified a serious security threat that originates from this base. The Pentagon, he scoffed. You mean some paper-pushing bureaucrats who have never seen real combat? Who have never had to make life-and-death decisions with incomplete information? Sir, I've served 2 combat tours in Afghanistan and 1 in Iraq. I've led intelligence operations that saved American lives. I'm not a paper pusher, and I'm not here to play games. Colonel Williams studied her face for a moment, as if trying to decide whether to believe her claims. Finally, he shook his head dismissively. Combat tours, right. Probably spent your time in air-conditioned offices while real soldiers did the fighting. The accusation hit Sarah like a physical blow. She thought of the nights she had spent in forward operating bases, analyzing intelligence under enemy fire. She remembered the weight of responsibility when her analysis determined where patrols would go, knowing that mistakes could cost lives. She thought of the soldiers who had thanked her for intelligence that had kept them alive. But she also knew that defending herself would only give Colonel Williams more ammunition for his attacks. Instead, she reached into her briefcase and pulled out a thick folder marked with classification stamps. Colonel, regardless of your opinion of my qualifications, I have a job to do. This folder contains evidence of security breaches that have occurred on your base over the past 6 months. I need to review your current protocols and interview key personnel. Williams glanced at the folder but made no move to take it. And what if I refuse to cooperate with this witch hunt? Sir, this is not a witch hunt. It's a legitimate investigation ordered by the Pentagon. Your cooperation is not optional. The colonel's face reddened with anger. Are you threatening me, Lieutenant? I'm explaining the situation, sir. The security of classified information is at stake. American lives could be at risk. Williams returned to his chair and sat down heavily. He gestured dismissively toward a chair across from his desk. Fine. Show me what you've got. But I'm warning you, if this turns out to be some politically motivated fishing expedition, there will be consequences. Sarah sat down and opened the folder. The documents inside represented months of careful investigation by multiple intelligence agencies. Financial records showing unexplained deposits in bank accounts. Communication intercepts revealing classified information being transmitted to known foreign agents. Security camera footage showing suspicious activity in areas where classified materials were stored. The investigation began when the CIA noticed that classified information about troop movements and supply routes was appearing in foreign intelligence reports, Sarah explained. They traced the leaks back to a source with access to intelligence briefings at Fort Henderson. Colonel Williams leaned forward, his earlier dismissive attitude replaced by growing concern. As Sarah walked through the evidence, his expression grew more serious. The financial records showed payments totaling over $200,000. The communication intercepts revealed details that only someone with high-level security clearance could have known. "This is impossible," Williams said finally. "Everyone with access to this level of classified information has been thoroughly vetted. Background checks, polygraph tests, the works. The investigation suggests that someone has been compromised through blackmail or financial pressure," Sarah continued. "The payments began small but increased over time, classic pattern for this type of espionage." Williams studied the documents more carefully. Sarah could see him beginning to understand the seriousness of the situation. The evidence was overwhelming and undeniable. Someone on his base was selling secrets to foreign agents. "What do you need from me?" he asked quietly. "I need access to personnel files for everyone with level 5 security clearance or higher. I need to review security footage from the past 6 months. And I need to interview key personnel without arousing suspicion." The colonel nodded slowly. "How long will this take?" "At least a week, possibly longer. The investigation is complex, and we need to be careful not to alert the subject. If they realize we're closing in, they could destroy evidence or flee." Williams stood up and walked to his window, looking out at the base he commanded. "You understand what this means? If there really is a spy on my base, it calls into question everything we do here. Every operation, every mission, every piece of intelligence we've handled." "Yes, sir. That's why it's critical that we find the source and close this leak as quickly as possible." The colonel turned back to face her. "I still think you're too young and inexperienced for this kind of investigation, but if the Pentagon sent you, I suppose you must know what you're doing." Sarah felt a flash of irritation at his continued condescension, but she kept her voice professional. "I've handled similar investigations before, Colonel. I understand the sensitivity and the stakes involved." "We'll see," Williams said. "I'll arrange for you to have access to the files you need. But I want to be kept informed of every development. This is my base, and ultimately, I'm responsible for everything that happens here." "Of course, sir. I'll provide regular briefings as the investigation progresses." Colonel Williams returned to his desk and pulled out a notepad. "I'll need you to sign confidentiality agreements and security protocols. And I want you to understand that any accusations against my personnel need to be backed up with solid evidence. I won't have good soldiers destroyed by speculation or circumstantial evidence." "I understand completely, sir. I have no intention of destroying anyone's career without justification." As they worked through the administrative details, Sarah found herself studying Colonel Williams more carefully. His initial reaction had been typical, dismissive, condescending, and insulting. But once confronted with real evidence, he had shown genuine concern for the security of his base and the welfare of his soldiers. Perhaps there was more to him than his prejudiced first impression suggested. Still, his comments about her age, experience, and qualifications rankled. Sarah had worked too hard and sacrificed too much to be dismissed so casually. What Colonel Williams did not know What nobody at Fort Henderson knew was that her mission here went far beyond investigating security breaches. The Pentagon had also sent her to evaluate Colonel Williams himself. Unknown to the colonel, his name had appeared on a list of personnel with unexplained financial activity. While not directly implicated in the security breaches, his background had raised enough questions to warrant investigation. The Pentagon wanted to know if Colonel Robert Williams was trustworthy enough to continue commanding Fort Henderson. As Sarah prepared to leave his office, she reflected on the irony of the situation. Colonel Williams had laughed at her rank, dismissed her experience, and questioned her qualifications. He had no idea that she held his career in her hands. Her report would determine whether he remained in command or faced court-martial proceedings. "Lieutenant Chen," Colonel Williams said as she reached the door, "I want you to know that despite my initial reservations about your age and experience, I'm willing to give you the benefit of the doubt. Don't disappoint me." Sarah turned back to face him, her expression carefully neutral. "Thank you, sir. I won't disappoint you." But as she walked down the corridor toward the elevator, Sarah knew that disappointment was the least of Colonel Williams's concerns. Before this investigation was over, his entire world would change. The small young woman he had dismissed as unqualified was about to determine his fate. The elevator doors closed behind her, and Sarah allowed herself a small smile. Colonel Williams had laughed at her rank, not realizing that she held a secret that would shock him to his core. The investigation was just beginning, and already she could see that nothing at Fort Henderson was as simple as it appeared. Tomorrow, she would begin the real work, uncovering the spy in their midst while simultaneously evaluating whether Colonel Williams deserved to keep his command. It would be a delicate balance, requiring all of her skills and experience. But Sarah Chen had never backed down from a challenge, and she did not intend to start now. The next morning arrived with the harsh reality of desert heat and the weight of a complex investigation. Sarah Chen sat in her temporary office, a cramped space in the base's intelligence building, surrounded by stacks of personnel files and security reports. The coffee in her mug had long gone cold, but she barely noticed as she studied patterns in the data before her. Her secure laptop displayed financial records that painted a troubling picture. Over the past 8 months, 3 different bank accounts connected to Fort Henderson personnel had received irregular deposits totaling nearly $400,000. The money came from shell companies with ties to foreign intelligence services, but the recipients had covered their tracks well. A knock at her door interrupted her concentration. "Come in." Sergeant Major Patricia Rodriguez entered, carrying a fresh stack of files. At 45, Rodriguez was a 20-year veteran who commanded respect throughout the base. Her silver hair was pulled back in a regulation bun, and her uniform bore the insignia of multiple deployments and commendations. "Morning, Lieutenant." "Colonel Williams asked me to deliver these additional security reports personally." Sarah gestured to a chair across from her desk. "Thank you, Sergeant Major. Actually, I was hoping to speak with you. Your name came up several times in my preliminary interviews." Rodriguez settled into the chair with the easy confidence of someone who had earned her position through years of dedicated service. "I imagine it would. I've been the senior enlisted advisor for security protocols for the past 2 years. Not much happens on this base without my knowledge." "That's exactly why I need to talk to you. Have you noticed any unusual activity lately? Personnel behaving differently, accessing areas they normally wouldn't visit, working unusual hours?" The sergeant major considered the question carefully. "There have been a few things. Nothing dramatic, but patterns that seemed off. Major Henderson has been staying late more often, supposedly working on training schedules. Captain Morrison has been asking questions about systems outside his usual area of responsibility." Sarah made notes as Rodriguez spoke. Both officers had already appeared on her list of persons of interest, but hearing it confirmed by someone with Rodriguez's experience added weight to her suspicions. What about Colonel Williams? Any changes in his behavior or routines? Rodriguez's expression became more guarded. The Colonel is complicated. He's old school, set in his ways. Sometimes that means he doesn't adapt well to new procedures or personnel. Such as? Well, he's had difficulty accepting some of the changes that have come with increased diversity in the officer corps. Women in leadership roles, younger officers with different perspectives. He tends to dismiss people who don't fit his traditional image of what a military leader should look like. Sarah nodded, thinking back to her initial meeting with Williams. His condescending attitude had been obvious, but she wondered how much deeper his prejudices ran. Has this affected his decision-making or leadership? Not his competence exactly. He's still a capable commander when it comes to operations and logistics. But he's created some morale problems. Several promising officers have requested transfers rather than deal with his attitude. This information aligned with intelligence Sarah had received before arriving at Fort Henderson. The Pentagon had noted an unusual number of transfer requests from qualified personnel stationed at the base. While not necessarily indicative of criminal activity, it suggested leadership problems that could compromise effectiveness. Sergeant Major, I need to ask you about something sensitive. Have you ever observed Colonel Williams engaging in activities that seemed questionable? Meetings with unauthorized personnel, handling of classified materials outside normal channels, anything like that? Rodriguez shifted uncomfortably in her chair. Lieutenant, I've served under Colonel Williams for 3 years. He has his flaws, but I've never seen him compromise security or betray his oath. If you're suggesting he's involved in espionage, I think you're barking up the wrong tree. Sarah appreciated the loyalty, even if it complicated her investigation. I'm not suggesting anything at this point. I'm simply gathering information and trying to understand the dynamics on this base. After Rodriguez left, Sarah returned to her files with renewed focus. The financial records showed a pattern that troubled her. The suspicious deposits had begun shortly after Colonel Williams had received a significant gambling debt from a casino in Las Vegas. While not conclusive evidence of wrongdoing, it established a potential motive for financial desperation. Her phone buzzed with a text message from her handler at the Pentagon. Any developments? Timeline is accelerating. Need preliminary assessment within 48 hours. Sarah rubbed her temples, feeling the pressure mounting. The investigation was complex enough without artificial deadlines, but she understood the urgency. Every day the spy remained active was another day classified information could be compromised. Around noon, Sarah decided to take a break from the files and conduct some first-hand observation. She walked across the base toward the commissary, noting the locations of security cameras and access points. The base was well designed from a security perspective, but she noticed several blind spots where someone could move without being recorded. The commissary was busy with the lunch crowd. Sarah got a sandwich and found a table where she could observe the interactions between personnel. Military bases were like small towns, with their own social hierarchies and informal communication networks. Understanding these dynamics was often crucial to successful investigations. She was finishing her sandwich when Colonel Williams entered the commissary with 2 other officers. Even from across the room, she could hear his loud voice and boisterous laughter. He moved through the space like he owned it, slapping backs and shaking hands with obvious enjoyment of his authority. Their eyes met across the room, and Williams's expression shifted. The jovial demeanor disappeared, replaced by the same dismissive look she had seen the day before. He said something to his companions that made them laugh, then headed in her direction. "Lieutenant Chen," he said, stopping at her table, "I trust you're making progress with your little investigation?" The condescending tone was back in full force. Sarah stood and came to attention, though Williams had not asked her to. "Sir, I'm following several promising leads. I should have a preliminary report ready for your review soon." Promising leads, Williams repeated, his voice dripping with skepticism. You know, Lieutenant, I've been thinking about our conversation yesterday. It occurs to me that the Pentagon might have sent you here for reasons other than this supposed security breach. Sarah's heart rate increased, but she kept her expression neutral. I'm not sure what you mean, sir. Williams stepped closer, lowering his voice so their conversation would not carry to other tables. I mean that maybe this is really about evaluating my command. Maybe some desk jockeys in Washington think I need oversight from a junior officer who looks like she should be playing with dolls instead of investigating security breaches. The comment was so insulting that Sarah had to consciously control her response. Sir, my investigation is focused solely on the security concerns I outlined yesterday. Is it? Williams's eyes narrowed. Because I did some checking of my own last night. Lieutenant Sarah Chen graduated top of her class from West Point, master's degree in international relations, served with distinction in multiple combat zones. Impressive credentials for someone so young. Sarah remained silent, unsure where Williams was heading with this line of conversation. But here's what's interesting, he continued. Your specialty isn't investigating security breaches. Your specialty is personnel evaluation and leadership assessment. You're not here to catch a spy, Lieutenant. You're here to spy on me. The accusation hung in the air between them. Sarah realized that Williams was more perceptive than she had given him credit for. His investigation into her background had revealed information that could complicate her mission significantly. Colonel, I can assure you that my primary focus is the security breach investigation. Williams laughed, but there was no humor in the sound. Primary focus. Notice you didn't deny that you're also evaluating my command. The Pentagon thinks I'm not fit to run this base, so they sent a little girl to check up on me. Several nearby tables had begun to notice their intense conversation. Sarah was acutely aware that their exchange was becoming a spectacle. Sir, perhaps we should continue this conversation in your office. No, Lieutenant. I think right here is perfect. Let everyone see the Pentagon's new approach to leadership evaluation. Send a child to judge the performance of seasoned combat veterans. The insult was designed to humiliate her in front of the other personnel, and Sarah could feel anger building in her chest. But she also recognized it as a tactical mistake on Williams's part. His public outburst would become part of her evaluation of his leadership capabilities. Colonel Williams, with respect, my age and appearance have no bearing on my qualifications or the validity of my assignment. Qualifications? Williams scoffed. Tell me, Lieutenant, how many soldiers have you commanded in combat? How many life and death decisions have you made when the bullets are flying and good people are dying? Sir, I've led intelligence teams in forward operating bases in Afghanistan and Iraq. I've made decisions that directly affected the safety of American soldiers. Intelligence teams, Williams repeated mockingly. How many soldiers? 5? 10? I've commanded thousands of soldiers across multiple deployments. I've been responsible for their lives, their training, their welfare. And the Pentagon thinks you're qualified to evaluate my performance? Sarah's anger was reaching a boiling point, but she forced herself to remain professional. Colonel, this conversation is inappropriate and counterproductive. If you have concerns about my assignment, I suggest you take them up with Pentagon leadership. Williams stepped even closer, clearly attempting to intimidate her with his size and presence. Oh, I intend to. But first, I want everyone on this base to understand exactly what kind of games the Pentagon is playing. They're so concerned with political correctness that they'll send an inexperienced girl to evaluate a proven combat leader. The commissary had grown quiet around them. Other personnel were clearly uncomfortable with the public confrontation between a colonel and a lieutenant. Sarah realized that Williams had made another tactical error. His public display of disrespect for a fellow officer reflected poorly on his leadership abilities. Colonel, I respectfully request that we continue this conversation in private. Why? Afraid people will see you for what you really are? A political appointment sent to undermine real soldiers? That was the final straw. Sarah straightened to her full height, which still left her looking up at Williams, but her voice carried the authority of someone who had earned her position through merit and sacrifice. Sir, I am a commissioned officer in the United States Army. I have served my country with distinction in combat zones where real soldiers bled and died. I have earned my rank and my assignment through competence and dedication, not politics. If you continue to question my qualifications based on my age or gender, I will be forced to include your comments in my official report. William's face reddened with anger. Are you threatening me, Lieutenant? I'm informing you of the consequences of your behavior, sir. For a moment, they stared at each other in tense silence. Sarah could feel the eyes of every person in the commissary watching their confrontation. William seemed to realize that he had pushed too far in such a public setting. This conversation is over, he said finally. Report to my office at 1400 hours for a briefing on base security protocols. Williams turned and walked away, leaving Sarah standing alone near her table. The commissary gradually returned to its normal noise level as conversations resumed, but she could feel people still glancing in her direction. Sarah returned to her temporary office feeling shaken by the confrontation. Williams had correctly identified her dual mission, which complicated everything. If he knew she was evaluating his leadership, he would be on guard against anything that might reflect poorly on his command. More troubling was his public display of disrespect and prejudice. His comments about her age and gender were not just personally insulting. They violated military standards of conduct between officers. The fact that he felt comfortable making such statements publicly suggested deeper problems with his leadership philosophy. Sarah spent the afternoon reviewing more personnel files and security footage. The evidence continued to point toward someone with high-level access selling classified information, but she had not yet identified the specific individual responsible. Major Henderson's late nights and Captain Morrison's unusual questions remained concerning, but she needed more concrete evidence. At 1400 hours, she reported to Colonel Williams's office as ordered. His secretary, a staff sergeant named Blake, gestured for her to enter without announcement. Williams was behind his desk reviewing documents, and he did not look up when she entered. Sarah came to attention and waited for acknowledgement. "At ease, Lieutenant," he said finally, still not looking at her. "Close the door and have a seat." Sarah followed his instructions and waited for him to begin the briefing. Williams continued reading for several minutes, clearly trying to establish his authority through the power play of making her wait. "Colonel Williams," she said finally, "you requested a briefing at 1400 hours. He looked up with cold eyes. "I did indeed. But first, I want to establish some ground rules for the remainder of your time on my base." Sarah remained silent, waiting for him to continue. "Rule 1. You will conduct your investigation with minimal disruption to base operations. My soldiers have jobs to do, and I won't have you interfering with their duties." "Understood, sir." Rule 2. You will provide me with daily briefings on your progress. I want to know exactly what you're doing and what you're finding. "Of course, sir." Rule 3. Any accusations against my personnel will be presented to me before being forwarded to the Pentagon. I won't have good soldiers destroyed by unsubstantiated allegations. This last rule was problematic. Sarah needed the flexibility to follow leads without Williams's interference, especially since he remained a person of interest himself. "Sir, I understand your concern for your personnel, but my investigation protocols require a certain degree of independence." Williams leaned forward, his expression hardening. "Lieutenant, this is my base. These are my soldiers. You may have been sent here by the Pentagon, but you're operating under my command authority while you're here." Sarah recognized the attempt to assert control over her investigation. "Sir, my orders come directly from Pentagon leadership. While I respect your position as base commander, my investigation must maintain its independence to be effective." "Independence," Williams repeated with obvious disdain. "Is that what they're calling insubordination these days?" The accusation was serious enough to warrant a formal response. "Colonel, I am not being insubordinate. I am explaining the parameters of my assignment as defined by Pentagon leadership." Williams stood and walked around his desk to stand directly in front of her chair. It was the same intimidation tactic he had used the day before, but this time, Sarah was ready for it. "Let me explain something to you, little girl," he said, his voice dropping to a threatening whisper. "I've been running this base successfully for 3 years. My soldiers respect me, my superiors trust me, and my record speaks for itself. I will not allow some inexperienced child to undermine my authority or destroy the careers of good soldiers based on speculation and circumstantial evidence." Sarah stood to face him, refusing to be intimidated by his size or proximity. "Colonel Williams, I am conducting a legitimate investigation into serious security concerns. Your attempts to interfere with that investigation will be noted in my report." "Report away," Williams said with a harsh laugh. "When this is over and you've found nothing but shadows and conspiracy theories, we'll see who the Pentagon believes, a proven combat leader or a little girl playing spy games." What Colonel Williams did not know, what he could never have imagined, was that Sarah's report would indeed determine his fate. But not in the way he expected. The woman he continued to dismiss as an inexperienced child held information that would shock him to his core. Because hidden in Sarah's classified orders, sealed from everyone including Colonel Williams, was a truth that would change everything. She was not just Lieutenant Sarah Chen, she was Lieutenant Colonel Sarah Chen, recently promoted and operating under deep cover to investigate not just security breaches, but the fitness of senior officers for continued command. The colonel had been laughing at her lieutenant's bars, not realizing that her true rank made her his superior officer, and everything he had said and done over the past 2 days was being carefully documented in a report that would determine whether he kept his command or faced the end of his military career. The investigation was far from over, but already the outcome was becoming clear. Colonel Williams had failed the most basic test of military leadership, treating all personnel with respect and dignity, regardless of their appearance or background. His prejudices and poor judgment had sealed his fate, even though he remained completely unaware of the consequences of his actions. 3 days later, Sarah Chen sat in her temporary office preparing for what would be the most significant briefing of her career. The evidence she had gathered painted a clear picture of espionage at Fort Henderson. But it also revealed something far more disturbing about the base's leadership structure. Her investigation had uncovered the spy. Major Thomas Henderson, the base's operations officer, had been selling troop movement schedules and supply route information to foreign agents for 8 months. Financial pressure from his wife's expensive medical treatments and gambling debts had made him vulnerable to recruitment. The evidence was overwhelming. Recorded phone conversations, financial transactions, and security footage of Henderson accessing classified files outside his normal duties. But Colonel Williams' behavior throughout the investigation had created an entirely separate problem. His continued disrespect, attempts to interfere with her work, and public displays of prejudice had demonstrated a fundamental failure of leadership that could not be overlooked. Sarah's phone rang, interrupting her thoughts. "Lieutenant Chen." "Colonel Chen, this is General Morrison from the Pentagon." The voice carried the weight of ultimate authority. "I'm calling for your final assessment." Sarah straightened in her chair, even though the general could not see her. "Sir, I've identified the source of the security breach. Major Henderson has been selling classified information to foreign agents. I have sufficient evidence for court-martial proceedings." "Excellent work. What about the secondary objective?" Sarah took a deep breath. This was the moment she had been dreading. "Sir, Colonel Williams has demonstrated behavior that makes him unfit for continued command. His conduct has been unprofessional, discriminatory, and potentially harmful to unit cohesion and morale. I see. Are you prepared to present your findings to him today? Yes, sir. I've scheduled a final briefing for 1500 hours. Very good, Colonel. Your orders are to reveal your true identity and rank at that time. Colonel Williams needs to understand the full scope of his failures. A promotion ceremony has been arranged for you next week to make your advancement official. After the call ended, Sarah sat quietly for several minutes, contemplating what was about to happen. In less than 2 hours, she would walk into Colonel Williams's office and reveal that the small young woman he had spent a week insulting and dismissing actually outranked him. The revelation would destroy his career, but his behavior had made it inevitable. A knock at her door interrupted her reflection. Come in. Sergeant Major Rodriguez entered, followed by Captain Maria Santos from the base's legal office. Both women looked serious and concerned. Lieutenant, Rodriguez began, then paused. Actually, before we continue, I need to know something. Is your real rank actually lieutenant? The question caught Sarah off guard. Why do you ask, Sergeant Major? Because I've been in the Army for 20 years, and I've never seen a lieutenant conduct an investigation with this level of authority and access. The Pentagon doesn't send junior officers on missions this sensitive unless there's more to the story. Captain Santos stepped forward. Ma'am, several personnel have approached me with concerns about Colonel Williams's behavior toward you. His public comments have created a hostile work environment that could result in formal complaints. Sarah studied both women carefully. They were respected leaders who had earned their positions through competence and dedication. They deserved honesty, even if she could not reveal everything. I can't discuss all aspects of my assignment, Sarah said carefully, but I can tell you that Colonel Williams' behavior has been thoroughly documented and will be addressed through appropriate channels. Rodriguez and Santos exchanged glances. Ma'am, Rodriguez said, we want you to know that many of us have been impressed with your professionalism despite the Colonel's treatment. Whatever your actual rank or assignment, you've conducted yourself with dignity and competence. After they left, Sarah continued her preparation for the afternoon briefing. She reviewed her evidence one final time, ensuring that every detail was accurate and defensible. The case against Major Henderson was solid, but the case against Colonel Williams was based on behavior and leadership failures rather than criminal activity. At 14:45 hours, Sarah gathered her files and walked across the base to the administration building. The Arizona sun was beginning its afternoon descent, casting long shadows across the military installation. Soon everything would change for Colonel Williams and Fort Henderson. She knocked on the colonel's office door at exactly 1500 hours. Enter. Colonel Williams was behind his desk reviewing documents. Major Henderson sat in a chair across from him, and both men looked up as Sarah entered. She noticed Henderson's nervous expression and the way his hands trembled slightly as he held his coffee cup. Ah, Lieutenant Chen, Williams said with his familiar condescending tone. Perfect timing. Major Henderson and I were just discussing base security protocols. I thought he should be here for your final briefing. Sarah came to attention, knowing it would be the last time she would need to show such deference to Williams. Sir, I have completed my investigation and I'm prepared to present my findings. Excellent, Williams said, leaning back in his chair with obvious satisfaction. I'm eager to hear how this witch hunt concludes. I assume you found nothing more than administrative irregularities and paranoid conspiracy theories? Sarah placed her briefcase on the conference table and began removing files. Actually, sir, I found conclusive evidence of espionage activities originating from this base. The room fell silent. Major Henderson's coffee cup rattled against its saucer as his hands began shaking more violently. Colonel Williams's smug expression disappeared, replaced by shock and concern. Espionage? Williams repeated. Are you certain? Absolutely certain, sir. Someone with high-level security clearance has been selling classified information to foreign agents for the past 8 months. Sarah opened the first file and spread financial records across the table. These documents show a pattern of payments totaling nearly $400,000 to bank accounts connected to Fort Henderson personnel. Williams leaned forward to study the documents. These accounts, I don't recognize these numbers. They belong to Major Henderson, Sarah said quietly. The accusation hung in the air like a bomb waiting to explode. Major Henderson's face went white, and he began to stammer denials. That's impossible. I would never. I'm not a spy. Sarah continued, methodically presenting evidence. Phone recordings of Henderson discussing classified information with known foreign agents, security footage of him accessing files outside his normal duties, financial records showing payments that coincided with specific intelligence breaches. The evidence is overwhelming, Major, Sarah said. You've been selling troop movement schedules and supply route information to foreign intelligence services. Henderson's denials became more frantic. You don't understand. My wife, her treatments cost so much. I was desperate. I never meant for anyone to get hurt. Colonel Williams stared at his operations officer in shock and betrayal. Tom, how could you do this? These men and women trusted you with their lives. I'm sorry, sir. I'm so sorry. The debts were crushing us, and they said the information wasn't that important. Just routine schedules and supplies. Sarah felt a mixture of satisfaction and sadness. The spy had been caught, but the human cost was devastating. Henderson's career was over. His family would face financial ruin and public shame, and the trust within the base's command structure was shattered. Major Henderson, Sarah said formally, you are under arrest for violations of the Espionage Act and treason against the United States. Military police officers who had been waiting outside entered the room and took Henderson into custody. As they led him away, he looked back at Colonel Williams with desperate eyes. Sir, I never meant for this to happen. Please take care of my family. After Henderson was gone, Williams slumped in his chair, looking older than his 55 years. I can't believe it. Tom Henderson. He's been with me for 2 years. I trusted him completely. Sarah began gathering her evidence files. Sir, the case against Major Henderson is complete. He will face court-martial proceedings and likely serve significant prison time. Williams nodded absently, still processing the betrayal. How did I miss this? How did I not see what was happening under my own command? Sir, sophisticated espionage operations are designed to avoid detection. Major Henderson was skilled at maintaining his cover while compromising security. Williams looked up at her with something approaching respect for the first time since they had met. I have to admit, Lieutenant, I underestimated you. This investigation was more complex than I realized. Sarah took a deep breath, knowing that the moment of truth had arrived. Colonel Williams, there's something else we need to discuss. What's that? Sarah reached into her briefcase and withdrew a sealed envelope marked with Pentagon classifications. Sir, my investigation included more than just the search for the spy. Williams's expression grew wary. What do you mean? I was also assigned to conduct a leadership evaluation of senior personnel at Fort Henderson. The colonel's face hardened. I knew it. I told you the first day that you were here to spy on me. Not spy, sir. Evaluate. The Pentagon had concerns about leadership effectiveness and personnel retention at this base. Williams stood and walked to his window, looking out at the base he had commanded for 3 years. And what did your evaluation conclude? Sarah opened the envelope and withdrew a formal report. Colonel Williams, over the past week, I have observed behavior that demonstrates a fundamental failure of military leadership principles. Williams turned back to face her, his jaw clenched. Such as? Discrimination, based on age and gender. Public humiliation of a fellow officer. Attempts to interfere with a legitimate Pentagon investigation. unprofessional conduct that undermines unit cohesion and morale. Those are serious accusations, Lieutenant. Sarah stood and faced him directly. They are not accusations, sir. They are documented observations of your behavior toward me and others. Williams stepped closer, falling back on his familiar intimidation tactics. You think the Pentagon will take your word over mine? You think they'll end my career based on the complaints of an inexperienced junior officer? Sarah looked up at him steadily, knowing that this would be the moment that defined both of their careers. Colonel Williams, there's something you need to know about my actual rank and assignment. Your rank? You're a lieutenant. I can see your bars. Sarah reached into her pocket and withdrew a small case. Inside were the silver oak leaves of a lieutenant colonel. Sir, my name is Lieutenant Colonel Sarah Chen. I was recently promoted and assigned to this investigation under deep cover. Williams stared at the insignia in shock. That's impossible. The lieutenant's bars were part of my cover identity. My actual rank is Lieutenant Colonel, which makes me your superior officer. The revelation hit Williams like a physical blow. He staggered backward, his face cycling through disbelief, shock, and growing horror as the implications became clear. You're a lieutenant colonel? Yes, sir. Everything you have said and done over the past week has been directed toward a superior officer. Your comments about my age, gender, and qualifications have been documented in my official report. Williams collapsed into his chair, the full weight of his situation finally becoming clear. My God, what have I done? Sarah continued relentlessly, knowing that this moment was crucial for Williams to understand the consequences of his behavior. You laughed at my rank without realizing that you were insulting a superior officer. You questioned my qualifications based on prejudice and assumptions. You attempted to interfere with a Pentagon investigation through intimidation and threats. But I didn't know. Your ignorance of my actual rank does not excuse your behavior, Colonel. The way you treated who you thought was a junior officer reveals your true character as a leader. Williams buried his face in his hands. My career is over. Sarah felt a mixture of professional satisfaction and human sympathy. Williams had brought this on himself through his prejudices and poor judgment, but the destruction of a military career was never pleasant to witness. Sir, my report will recommend that you be relieved of command and face administrative action for conduct unbecoming an officer. Williams looked up with desperate eyes. Lieutenant Colonel, ma'am, is there anything I can do? Any way to make this right? Sarah considered the question carefully. Throughout the investigation, she had seen glimpses of Williams's genuine concern for his soldiers and his competence in operational matters. His prejudices and poor interpersonal skills were serious flaws, but they might be correctable with proper training and supervision. Colonel Williams, the Pentagon will make the final determination about your future. However, if you were to voluntarily undergo leadership training and sensitivity counseling, it might demonstrate your commitment to change. Williams nodded eagerly. Yes, ma'am. Whatever it takes. I know I made mistakes, but I can learn. I can do better. Sarah began packing her materials, knowing that her work at Fort Henderson was complete. The spy had been caught, the security breach had been closed, and the leadership problems had been identified and documented. Colonel Williams, there's one final thing you need to understand. The way you treated me over the past week is the same way you've been treating other personnel who don't fit your narrow definition of what a military leader should look like. Young officers, women, minorities, they've all experienced your prejudice and condescension. Williams listened with growing understanding. I never realized. That's exactly the problem, sir. You never thought about how your behavior affected others. Military leadership requires respect for all personnel, regardless of their appearance or background. Sarah stood to leave, then paused at the door. Colonel, you have an opportunity to learn from this experience and become a better leader. I hope you take it. As Sarah walked across the base for the final time, she reflected on the complexity of leadership and human nature. Colonel Williams was not an evil person, but his prejudices and inability to adapt had made him ineffective as a leader in the modern military. The investigation had revealed two different types of betrayal. Henderson's espionage had betrayed his country and his fellow soldiers, while Williams's prejudice had betrayed the principles of military leadership and respect for all personnel. 3 weeks later, Sarah stood in a Pentagon ceremony room receiving her promotion to full colonel. The investigation at Fort Henderson had been deemed a complete success. Major Henderson had been court-martialed and sentenced to 15 years in military prison. The security breaches had been closed and new protocols had been implemented to prevent similar incidents. Colonel Williams had voluntarily requested transfer to a staff position with mandatory leadership training and counseling. His military career would continue, but under close supervision and with a clear understanding that his previous behavior would not be tolerated. As Sarah pinned on her colonel's insignia, she thought about the lessons learned at Fort Henderson. Prejudice and assumptions could destroy careers and undermine military effectiveness. True leadership required respect for all personnel, regardless of their appearance or background. The small young woman who had walked into Colonel Williams's office a month earlier had proven that competence and courage could not be measured by size or age. She had caught a spy, evaluated a commander, and demonstrated that the modern military was changing for the better. Colonel Williams had laughed at her lieutenant's bars, not realizing that she was his superior officer. But more importantly, he had failed to realize that the future of military leadership belonged to those who judged others by their abilities rather than their appearance. The investigation was complete, but the real work of building a more inclusive and effective military continued. Sarah Chen, now Colonel Chen, was ready to lead that effort, one base at a time.